Here's the challenge. To reach net zero emissions, we need $150 trillion in sustainable investments by 2050. Right now, we're at $1 trillion per year. We need a strategy to push sustainable investments. And here's a proposal. What we first need is a definition of what we consider a sustainable investment. And I think that this is solved. The European Union is a policy leader when it comes to sustainable finance, and in 2020 they have published a unified definition of what they consider as sustainable. It is called the EU taxonomy. And at its core, the taxonomy is just a list, giving criteria if an economic activity is in line with reaching net zero by 2050 or not. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you own a wheat farm. You need to fulfill a couple of criteria. First criterion, you need to show that you avoid or reduce greenhouse gas emissions by employing suitable practices. This means that, for instance, you might have to show that you have reduced your greenhouse gas emissions by 20% over the last year, or that your greenhouse gas emissions are not disproportionately high compared to other wheat farmers. And this criterion is eventually checked by European Union officials. The second criterion you need to meet is your farm cannot be on land which has before been a major carbon stock. So that would be, for instance, a rainforest or a wetland. And if you meet these criteria and a few more, your farm is considered to be a green investment. So if someone invests in your farm, this is a green investment. And the taxonomy includes criteria like this for every major economic sector that produces a significant amount of greenhouse gases. And to be fair, this list is a bit controversial. Under the taxonomy, for instance, production of electricity from gas combustion is considered green. And the argument is that gas is the most efficient fossil fuel we have, because it creates the least carbon dioxide among all fossil fuels. And the makers of the taxonomy argue that gas is absolutely needed to transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a green economy. And thus they say that gas, the most efficient fossil fuel, is green. But putting those controversies aside, the taxonomy is a very important achievement because it gives us a crystal clear definition of what we consider as green and what not. So with that out of the way, we can ask ourselves the question how we can persuade investors to invest in those green assets. And let's start with a very fundamental insight. Investors like returns. So what is the fundamental problem of a sustainable investments? Sustainable investments usually have worse returns. Remember that the return is just the cash flow you get from an asset in a year divided by the cost or the price you pay today. So in this concrete example, the asset pays 100 in revenue or cash flow in a year, but the price you pay for that asset is 80. So your gross return is 1.25. But the problem is that sustainable production is more expensive. You have higher costs or a higher price, which means your return goes down. A concrete example for that, the usual cost for producing 1 ton of cement right now is at $125. But if you offset the carbon emissions by filtering the carbon out of the air, or in other words, by using carbon capture technology, you are at more than double the cost of production. So if you look at the returns, a sustainable cement plant is just a worse investment than a traditional plant. You can sell the cement for about the same price, but you have significantly more costs. However, economists are in full agreement on how to solve that problem. We need to introduce a global carbon price. And this just means that we force everyone to actually pay the price for their pollution. Because with a carbon price, the advantage of unsustainable production vanishes. Because now the cost for cement is $125 plus the price you need to pay for your carbon emissions. And if the price is high enough, the unsustainable production will become more costly than a sustainable production. And then we've solved our problem. We know investors love returns, and if our sustainable investment has better returns, investments will naturally move there. So why does that price have to be global? If the price is not global, well, companies will just move their emissions to countries without the carbon price. This phenomenon is called carbon leakage. And to show you the state of the world right now, here's a map of all countries who have implemented a carbon price as of today. And this kind of looks promising. although the United States are missing. But with this map, we're fooling ourselves. To reach net zero, economists argue that we need a price of $100 per ton of carbon. But right now, Argentina is at 95 cents per ton, Canada is at $8.64, the European Union is at almost $90 with their emission trading scheme, but they have a lot of loopholes, so companies actually don't pay $90 for their carbon emissions. So summing that up, we are quite far. We know what sustainable investments are, we know we need a global carbon price to make investors invest into them, but the fundamental issue is we're not implementing it. Our strategy is not finished. We need one more thing: a global marketing campaign for protecting our climate. And this is not my argument, it is from a very famous economist, Andrew Oswald. Let me explain. Politicians in every country have to listen to what their people say. This is obviously true in democracies, but it also holds true for countries like China. If you want to stay in power, you can't fully ignore your citizens. And here's a study from Andrew Oswald. In 2020, he was asking 30,000 Europeans the question, what do you think are the two most important issues facing your country at the moment? Maximum of 2 answers. And here's what he gets. 26% select health and social security, 24% select cost of living, 18% select economic situation, 18% select unemployment, and then we have only 16% who select climate change. It is only the 5th most important issue for Europeans. And I mean, it's obvious why. Life is busy. On a day-to-day basis, I worry about the health of my grandmother, the school grades of my daughter, and if I get promoted in my job. Climate change feels second order. And that is why politicians don't act rigorously. Their people do not care enough. And here lies the solution. Climate change feels second order, but it is not. If we don't act now, neither the grandmother, nor you, nor your daughter have a future. The key is what we need to change is how people feel about climate change. And don't get me wrong, we don't need to lie. We just need to raise awareness and put the climate crisis at the top of people's minds. This is comparable to how we reacted to tobacco. Tobacco has always been dangerous in the long term. Once the scientific evidence was there, governments just started spreading it. Anti-smoking campaigns were run all over the world, and with this, we actually are quite successful in bringing down smoking. In 2000, 34% of all adults were smokers. Now it's 23%. So let me conclude. We need a global successful marketing campaign for protecting our climate. Because if the climate crisis is at the top of people's minds, politicians will listen. And if they implement a carbon price, our economic system will do the rest. So to kick this off, here's my climate spot. It's called I Can Breathe. We're living in a world where people scream, I can't breathe! I can't breathe! Not only because of injustice, but also because we're polluting our air and suffocating underneath. Temperature is up by 1 degree Celsius since 1900. Sea levels have risen by 20 centimeters in the last century. We lose 100,000 species every year. But stop. We together can turn this around. Let us start spread awareness, not greenhouse gases. We need to call on every solution we have for pollution and give our nature a bright future. Let us cancel Earth Overshoot Day and see the worth in living right on target. Together we can create a world where people don't scream, I can't breathe, but I can breathe.